Hello, this is Food Offensive Weekly News for April 8th, 2013, and I've got several topics to cover this week concerning GMOs, the labeling of GMOs, the Monsanto Protection Act, who's responsible for putting that through, and also an action alert concerning the Monsanto Watch. So again, another GMO-laden episode this week because that's at the forefront of what we're talking about and one of the biggest issues concerning our food supply and the safety thereof. So the first story this week is from an article from Alternet titled, "Are Walmart and Big Food Lobbying for a GMO Labeling Law?" And this is actually Ronnie Cummins wrote this. He's from the Organic Consumers Association. This is posted on Alternet, an article by him. And this particular article is actually back from January 10th of this year, but it was the buzz this week in news and concerning when we're talking about the GMO labeling debate. And also the article was published in partnership with globalpossibilities.org. And he starts out by saying, "Could it be that bad press and consumer backlash have dulled the enthusiasm of these former biotech cheerleaders? Or is Big Food just cozying up to the FDA so they can derail the growing organic and anti-GMO movement and finagle a federal labeling law so toothless it won't be worth the ink it takes to sign it?" So that's just kind of sums up what this is about. Are they truly looking at changing the labeling as we want it to be done, or are they, like he said, just cozying up to FDA to put something in to act that would in a way trick us or make it not exactly what we were hoping for? He just refers to informed sources in Washington, D.C. for some of this information. Representatives of many companies, including Walmart, General Mills, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Mars, Coca-Cola, and others, were meeting at the FDA. And the Organic Consumers Association has initiated this boycott of what they call, quote, trader brands. And these are some of the ones that, quote, natural and some organic brands whose parent companies contributed millions of dollars to defeat Prop 37 back in California on November 6th during the last election time. And this article goes on he lists some of these particular products that are involved here: Cascadian Farms, Horizon Silk, Ben & Jerry's, and supposedly organic or sustainable produced products. And they've been tarnished by their association with the policies of Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, and some of their parent companies. So he goes on to say that this makes sense that the big food elite may be preparing for a tactical retreat from the largest food fight in U.S. history. And he asks what would cause them to rethink the PR and bottom line costs of clinging to their anti-right-to-know positions. And he's asking, it's possible that it's because of some grassroots GMO labeling movement that is prompting their change in positions potentially. Now, though many Americans don't know it, these particular companies, Walmart, General Mills, and Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, Kellogg's, Starbucks, even McDonald's, they're GMO-free in Europe thanks to strict GMO labeling laws. And you see, once again, I've pointed out the last several weeks that many countries have already banned GMOs in their country, but yet we continue to allow them in. He says maybe Big Food is ready to throw in the towel. Or is this a bait and switch deal to get us to shut up? And then he kind of refers to some some past instances where of examples why we should be wary of any compromise deals at the federal level. One he's referring to in Japan in 2001, and also in late 2010, there was a closed-door meeting when members of the, quote, organic elite, including Whole Foods, tried to engineer a compromise with Monsanto and the USDA over coexistence between GMO alfalfa and organic crops. He says when major food corporations, under pressure from consumers, break ranks with Monsanto and the biotech industry, GMO policy, public policy, and marketplace dynamics change dramatically. And I think we're seeing that now. He refers also since 1994, the bovine growth hormone, a consumer-led rejection and the example of what can be done when we, band together and reject those things. And right now, 10% or less of U.S. dairy cows are injected with that. And actually, it was a Monsanto technology, and they don't even own it anymore. They knew that it wasn't gonna, they bailed on it. He goes on to talk about the connections in the White House, in the FDA, former Monsanto people that are now in the FDA, particularly Michael Taylor. And then he concludes by saying, this monumental food fight is not just about labeling GMOs. We are fighting as well for a healthy and sustainable food and farming system, a green and equitable economy, a stable climate, and a real democracy where citizens, not corporations and their indentured politicians, rule. And see, this is the issue that we have in this day and age, where it gets so daunting that we feel there's no way out because of the connections and the revolving doors in Washington. And I'm going to cover that here this week. Actually just referred to an article on it. But concerning the GMO labeling laws, there's actually 25 states. Again, Organic Consumers Association referring to this, April 3rd, 2013, talking about 25 states working on GMO labeling laws. And you can see that here on the screen. That's half of the U.S. states that are working on some form of law or another. And so there is action being taken. And I'm going to move on to the next article before we run out of time here. And like I said, this really ties in, all it ties in together this week. But this next article I'm covering here is from the New York Times. Mark Bittman, from April 2nd, 2013. He's has an article titled, Why Do GMOs Need Protection? And it's going to tie in here with the Monsanto Protection Act. And that's kind of what he's referring to. And he refers to opening by saying genetic engineering in agriculture has disappointed many people who once had hopes for it, excluding, of course, those who've made money from it, appropriately represented in the public's mind by Monsanto. And talks about recently they managed to get an outrageous rider slipped into the 587-page funding bill Congress sent to President Obama. And basically a short little description of what that rider is. He says the rider essentially prohibits the Department of Agriculture from stopping production of any genetically modified or engineered crop once it's in the ground, even if there's evidence that it is harmful. So, like many have said and properly deemed it as a Monsanto Protection Act, and basically giving them damage protection. And he says that's a preemptive congressional override of the judicial system. The override is unnecessary as well as disgraceful because the USDA is already overly supportive of genetically engineered crops. Yeah, that's right. And he talks about seed genetics. It's more properly genetic or transgenic engineering, in which a gene, usually from another species of plant, bacterium, or animal, is inserted into a plant in the hope of positively changing its nature. It has been this process has been disappointing. Yeah, I would agree. There's many studies that show that it's not exactly what we thought it was going to be. It's actually detrimental to ourselves and the environment. He talks about the genetic engineering in agriculture. There are crops resistant to Monsanto's Roundup herbicide and crops that contain their own insecticide. The first have already failed as so-called superweeds have developed resistance to Roundup, and the second are showing signs of failing as insects are able to develop resistance to the inserted Bt toxin faster than new crop variations can be generated. So they were thinking maybe a 20, if I remember correctly, 20 to 25 year span when this resistance would be built up, but we're seeing it very quickly, just much shorter, half the time than we thought it was going to take place. Now, Doug Gurian-Sherman, he is a senior scientist and plant pathologist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Concerning the Roundup Ready seeds, allowed farmers to spend less time and energy controlling weeds, but the temporary nature of the gains was predictable. And he is quoted by saying, "There was no better way to create weeds tolerant to glyphosate or Roundup than to spray all of them intensely for a few years," Gurian-Sherman told me. And he says, and that's what was done. So that's the issue. They just keep, it causes them to dump even more pesticide onto, or herbicide onto the plants. And this has resulted in the biggest crisis in monocrop agriculture. 90% of all soybeans and 70% of corn is grown using Roundup Ready seed. And he says that around a dozen weed species have developed resistance to it. Any ecologist would have predicted this, and many did, he said. Bt toxin, insect resistance, and he's referring to that. He said we're going to starting to see that resistance now. And aside from the shame of Congress, there is another important issue here. Many steps could be taken right now to improve yields while diminishing the need for herbicides and pesticide. And there was a USDA Iowa State University farm study done that basically acknowledged that classical breeding methods remain superior to genetic engineering for whole crop improvement. So there's, I always look at the problems with this, and I don't spend enough time on the solutions, and that there is proof that there's potential for us to be able to do this whole farming thing and feed everybody like we need to do without the genetically engineering of our crops. And so we're going to look more of that in the future. But he goes back to talking about the biotech rider and basically saying Congress is again protecting corporations from the public interest, and talking about genetically modified organisms should so be labeled. The hijacking of the Constitution and so on and so forth, that he refers to their technology not being great. He says, did Polaroid, Xerox, or Microsoft need protection? And he says their research costs are high, kind of going through all the negative aspects of the biotech industry, and it talking about how it's been a little more than an income generator for a few corporations desperate to see those profits continue regardless of the cost to the rest of us or to the environment, and give some action points as well. But without spending too much time on that particular story, there's also I said I would refer quickly to the big businesses and the revolving door in the government. It's not just GMO crops and the biotech industry, of course, but it's everything. This is a Project on Government Oversight, POGO, an article titled "Big Businesses Offer Revolving Door Rewards," and the particular picture and everything is talking about a former Citibank executive who is now the nominee for Treasury Secretary. I mean, is that a little bit of a conflict of interest? I understand you have to be able to get people that are well-versed and experienced in that particular position you're trying to fill, but give me a break. I mean, it's a conflict of interest, to say the least, and we see those problems throughout the government in those positions. And also, former bank heads, I mean, you name it. And then, of course, when it comes to the biotech industry, you've got former people that were either on legal counsel for Monsanto or just part of working for Monsanto itself, who are now in top positions or are providing, insight for other business. Now, when I talked about the Monsanto Protection Act, when I first covered that, we talked about Senator Mikulski from Maryland. She was the one who originally we thought kind of helped the bill go through, or was guilty of doing that. But actually, the Center for Food Safety released an article on March 29th that's they're saying they applaud Senator Mikulski's statement opposing the biotech rider. So she has recently released a statement asserting her opposition to the controversial biotech rider, and they say it's a welcome and essential. She is a welcome and essential voice in opposition to this ill-conceived corporate welfare rider, said the executive director for Center for Food Safety, Andrew Kimbrell. He says the American public has relied on Senate Democrats to be a backstop against dangerous policy riders like this, said Colin O'Neill. He said, we call on Senator Mikulski to continue speaking out against this rider and call on her work with the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee to ensure that it is excluded from any future appropriations bills. And this went into effect March 28, and it only has a 6-month lifespan. So we have a chance to, go back and fix it. But Senator Barbara Mikulski, she's a U.S. Senator from Maryland. Her statement is right here. She's released that. And March 29th, she released that. She's a Democrat from Maryland, like I said. Today issued the following statement from spokeswoman Rachel McKnight. Senator Mikulski understands the anger over this provision. She didn't put the language in the bill and doesn't support it either. So there possibly could have been a miscommunication or misinformation that took place. But the fact is she's coming out and hopefully fixing it. And if she is who she says she is and who others are saying that she is, as far as her stance on her food safety record, actually it refers to that in here. It says Senator Mikulski has a strong food safety record. She has supported a bill requiring labeling of genetically engineered fish, an amendment to the Farm Bill that allows states to require labeling of edible foods and beverages for sale that contain genetically engineered ingredients, and called for labeling of cloned animals or their progeny. So she sounds like a great person to have on our side when it comes to this GMO labeling debate. If, like I said, she is who she says she is. But here's something I wanted to point out on this. As chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Mikulski's first responsibility was to prevent a government shutdown. That meant she had to compromise on many of her own priorities to get a bill through the Senate that the House would pass. She will continue to fight for a regular and timely appropriations process and other valuable priorities, including food safety. Well, this is the problem here, and that's why I wanted to point this out. Yes, I applaud her for coming out and speaking against it, but here's the problem we have with government, and especially the government we are under, is she pushed this through to prevent a government shutdown. Okay, as if we couldn't go a day without the government sucking off of us. I mean, seriously, if I'm reading this correctly. But also, she had to compromise on many of her own priorities. Well, these aren't just her priorities. These are priorities on millions of Americans that want to know. The majority, in fact, that polls have showed what's in their food, and she had to compromise on that. Well, that's the problem. There's too much compromise going on, and it's always the government first, and what's seen as best for, quote, best for the country. Well, this particular thing isn't. So but I do applaud her again. If she is going to, like they say on here, will continue to fight for a regular and timely appropriations process and other valuable priorities, including food safety. So it sounds like she has a good record for this. So I think she, we can let her slide on that one maybe, but it is something to be concerned about. And now this Mother Jones article of Tom Philpott, he covers a lot of food issues that I use a lot of his articles for. And he says that Senator Roy Blunt, who he says is Monsanto's man in Washington, was responsible for getting the bill through. And I wanted to point this out because this is also talking about the revolving door slash being in the pockets of these people, of these big corporations, and them being in the pockets of our politicians. And talking about this rider, the Monsanto Protection Act, that he's saying which senator pushed the rider into the bill. At the time, no one stepped forward to claim credit, but since then, Senator Roy Blunt, a Republican from Missouri, has done so. Well, Republican in Missouri. Missouri is Monsanto's home state, so go figure. This was April 4th, 2013. And he says Blunt even told Rogers that he worked with GMO seed giant to craft the rider. So, yeah, I'm sure he worked with them real well, and they probably paid him real well. And we're going to look at some of this. He reported money that he's received from them, some not so big, some, whatever. The fact is he's getting paid by a company that now he's helping push legislation for. That's a little bit of a conflict of interest. But it says Blunt's ties to Monsanto, whose office is located in the senator's home state. $10,000 he was given when he was serving as in the House of Reps in 2008, and when he ran for Senate, Monsanto upped its contribution to $44,000. And in 2012, the GMO seed pesticide giant enriched Blunt's campaign war chest by $64,250. So not great big amounts of money, but more than most Americans make in a year, that's for sure. And talks about his other ties, and not just himself, but his lovely wife. His connections to lobbyists extend to his family. That's right, his wife Abigail serves as head of U.S. government affairs for the processed food giant Kraft, and she was on the annual list of top lobbyists. That same year, Kraft joined Monsanto in shoveling cash into the effort to defeat Prop 37. So both these companies vied for the fight against labeling, and the Blunt family were both in each of those. They were in each of their pockets respectively, and not just his wife, but also his son Matt. He was honored with an award for leadership excellence by the biotech industry, and he's also gotten quite a bit of money from the tobacco bill that was put into the Homeland Security bill. And so, of course, the whole family, it's a family affair here. And Philpott ends the article by saying, if Senator Blunt plans to continue carrying Monsanto's water in the Senate, the company will have gained the allegiance of a wily and proven political operator. So this is the only person that I've seen reporting on this, and so I think we've got our man. We've got the person responsible for pushing that through, whether on one level or another. But he did say that he, quote, worked with the GM seed giant Monsanto to craft the rider. So here we go, just like the insurance companies working behind closed doors to write the Obamacare plan, in which they benefit from. Go figure. It's quite the business if you can get into it, and if you're evil enough to do it. This whole collusion with government, or rather insight for the government concerning particular potential procedures and policies and laws. And so moving on to this week's action alert news that's going on. If you're watching this video, you've already missed this opportunity, but there's something coming up early in the summer as well. But they were hosting an eat-in to label GMOs. The Occupy Monsanto, they were going to do calling it an eat-in at the FDA. And basically, you bring your own bowl, and they were going to do the stone soup. There's a story behind stone soup, and I'm going to show you the video here. There's a quick little news report from RT News, I believe, did it, and you're going to see the clip here, and I'm actually going to end on that clip. So this is a particular action alert that you can follow in addition to all the others that we're looking at with the Monsanto Protection Act, that ongoing saga there, and also the genetically engineered fish, which is getting quite close to being the deadline on that coming to a head, and some other things that are going on. So again, here's another one for you to follow concerning the labeling of GMOs. And here's that clip right now. But until next time, this is foodoffensive.com coming at you with Food Offensive Weekly News. Thank you for joining me.
It's an age-old tale with lessons that extend to modern life. Today, the story of Stone Soup brought a group of protesters, activists, and food advocates together. But instead of hungry stomachs, these protesters are taking a bite into the issue of genetically modified foods by confronting the two entities they say are responsible for food secrecy, the Food and Drug Administration and the biotech giant Monsanto.
With GMOs, you have to try very hard to not eat a GMO food in this country. It's not labeled, and people are demanding that the GMO foods are labeled.
So the story of Stone Soup goes like this. There was once a traveler who entered a village and he was hungry, but none of the villagers offered him anything to eat. So he goes into the middle of a city and he puts a pot in there and he adds a couple of stones. And the whole point is that people from around the village that were curious actually came in and added their own ingredients. They added mushrooms and cucumbers, lettuce, carrots, and potatoes. And soon enough, the entire community was surrounding one pot. So obviously this is a fairy tale, but the moral of the story is that the entire community actually came together to surround an issue and to make a stone soup like what you see here today.
That's our intention in this, is to show the community building of eating together, and that we can share a meal with each other, we can share a meal with the FDA, and it can be just this symbolic community building and relationship building.
Another issue the group drew attention to today, the revolving door between the government and private sector. Meet Michael Taylor. He's the former vice president of public policy for Monsanto. That was until he became the deputy commissioner of foods at the FDA. And those close ties between the government and the biotech industry are something food activists can't stomach.
Of course, now that we have a food regulator that used to work for Monsanto, it's a bit of a conflict of interest. So I really want to help popularize the idea that we need to close the revolving doors and get the Monsanto minions out of the food regulating portions of our government.
Over 100 protesters showed up today with bowls and picket signs in hand. But the FDA says these foods are safe for consumption. A statement released today by the agency says, quote, in general, foods derived from genetically engineered plants must meet the same requirements, including safety requirements as other foods, such as foods derived from traditionally bred plants. The statement went on to support voluntarily labeling GMO foods, but wouldn't force the issue. Despite the fact that California's Proposition 37, which was the first public vote on GMO labeling, failed, despite the fact that the new federal budget includes the so-called Monsanto Protection Act, these protesters say the food labeling movement is just beginning.
We're really in the infant stages of a worldwide food movement that's been on the rebound.
In the end, these protesters say they can have their cake labeled and eat it too. Reporting in College Park, Maryland, Megan Lopez, RT.